The massive conference room buzzed with quiet conversations as representatives from dozens of species took their seats around the circular table. Ambassador Tay Rim smoothed her dark blue diplomatic robes and checked her notes one final time. After 30 years of handling galactic border disputes, she knew exactly how these meetings would go. The Crystalline Collective would argue about mining rights in the Outer Rim. The hegemony would push for expanded trade routes. Someone would complain about space piracy near the neutral zones. But there was always one section of the galactic map that never changed, never sparked debate, never even got mentioned. And today, unfortunately, someone was about to break that unspoken rule. The holographic display flickered to life in the center of the room, showing a three-dimensional map of known space. Thousands of star systems glowed in different colors, representing the territories of various galactic powers. Trade routes crisscrossed between them like glowing highways. Border disputes were marked with pulsing red indicators. Representative Jin Woo from the Veltar delegation leaned forward in his chair, studying the map with fresh eyes. His people had only achieved faster-than-light travel 15 years ago, making them newcomers to galactic politics. Everything still fascinated him, from the massive hegemony territories stretching across 3 spiral arms to the mysterious, crystalline structures that marked collective space. But something caught his attention that didn't make sense. Near the inner edge of the galaxy sat a roughly spherical region, significantly smaller than the major powers, but clearly marked with thick boundary lines. The label simply read, Human Territory Restricted Access in the standard galactic script. What puzzled Jin Woo wasn't the territory itself, but how everyone seemed to ignore it completely. During his preparation for this meeting, he'd reviewed hundreds of border negotiation records. Species fought over single star systems. Wars had been started over asteroid mining rights. Yet this human territory, despite being positioned in a strategically valuable location near several major trade routes, never appeared in any dispute records. No one had ever challenged their borders. No one had ever even requested passage through their space. The formal proceedings began with Chairman Velkorin calling the session to order. One by one, territorial disputes were presented, debated, and resolved. The Korthax Empire wanted expansion rights into an unclaimed sector. Approved. The collective requested modified boundaries around a newly discovered crystal formation. Approved with conditions. Standard diplomatic business. Jin Woo waited patiently for his turn to speak. When Chairman Velkorin finally acknowledged the Veltar delegation, he stood and activated his personal display pointer. Thank you, Chairman. I have a question about territorial consistency in our records. He directed the pointer toward the human territory, and the room's temperature seemed to drop several degrees. This region has remained unchanged in our databases for over 40 years, yet it's positioned along several major trade corridors. I'm curious about the historical precedent for such stable boundaries, especially considering humanity's relatively recent entry into galactic affairs. The silence that followed wasn't the usual brief pause of diplomatic consideration. This was the heavy, suffocating quiet that comes when someone has just stepped on a landmine. Ambassador Tay Rim felt her stomach clench as she watched the reactions. Around the room, the hegemony representative, a tall being with multiple arms, suddenly became very interested in his data pad. The collective's crystalline delegate dimmed its natural glow, their species equivalent of nervous fidgeting. Most telling of all was the reaction from the Korthax delegation. These were warriors, a species that had built an empire through conquest and had never backed down from any challenge. Yet their ambassador visibly tensed, his predatory features hardening into an expression of barely controlled anxiety. Chairman Velkorin cleared his throat, a sound that came out as more of a mechanical wheeze through his breathing apparatus. For Representative Jin Woo, perhaps we should focus on more pressing territorial matters. I believe the Outer Rim mining disputes require immediate attention. But Jin Woo wasn't deterred. His species had survived by asking questions, by understanding their environment completely before making decisions. With respect, Chairman, I've reviewed our historical records, and I can't find any documentation explaining why this particular territory receives such unique treatment. Human civilization has only been spacefaring for approximately 2 centuries, yet their boundaries seemed to be treated as untouchable. Ambassador Tai Rim closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of memories she'd spent decades trying to forget. Around the table she could see the same recognition in the faces of other senior diplomats. They all remembered. They all knew why those boundaries existed, and they all understood why those memories were better left buried. The chairman's voice carried a note of finality that brooked no argument. I believe this session has covered sufficient ground for today. We'll reconvene next quarter to address any remaining territorial concerns. The meeting dissolved quickly, delegates gathering their materials and filing out with unusual haste. Jin Woo remained seated, confused and frustrated by the abrupt dismissal. He'd simply asked a legitimate question about diplomatic precedent, yet the entire assembly had reacted as if he'd threatened to detonate a bomb. As the room emptied, he noticed Ambassador Tae-rim lingering near the display, staring at the human territory with an expression he couldn't quite read. It wasn't curiosity or professional interest. It looked almost like fear. Jin Woo couldn't sleep that night. The strange reaction at the Border Commission meeting kept replaying in his mind. He'd asked a simple question about territorial boundaries, something that should have been routine diplomatic business. Instead, the entire room had acted like he'd committed some terrible social mistake. Back in his quarters aboard the Veltar diplomatic vessel, he pulled up his personal research terminal and began digging through every database he could access. The ship's computer hummed quietly as it processed his search requests, scanning through decades of diplomatic records, territorial agreements, and historical archives. The results were frustratingly incomplete. Human civilization appeared in galactic records around 2157 when they made first contact with a hegemony exploration vessel near what would later become their border region. The initial contact reports were standard diplomatic language, noting that humans appeared to be a relatively new spacefaring species with basic faster-than-light technology. What followed in the records made no sense at all. Within just 5 years of first contact, every major galactic power had signed nearly identical treaties with humanity. Not trade agreements or cultural exchanges, but formal territorial recognition pacts. The language in each treaty was almost word for word the same, as if someone had provided a template that every species simply copied and signed. The most puzzling part was a single clause that appeared in every single agreement. No vessel of any signatory species shall enter human territorial space without explicit prior invitation from human authorities. Not without permission or without clearance, but specifically requiring an invitation. It was the kind of language usually reserved for the most sacred or dangerous locations in the galaxy. Jin Woo leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. He'd been researching for 6 hours and felt like he was missing something obvious. The treaties themselves raised more questions than they answered. Why would established galactic powers, some of whom had been spacefaring for thousands of years, immediately recognize the territorial claims of a species that had barely left their home system? He decided to try a different approach and contacted his colleague Hyune, who worked in the Veltar Military Intelligence Division. If anyone would have access to classified information about galactic territorial disputes, it would be her. The communication link crackled to life, showing Hyune's face in the blue glow of her office lighting. She looked tired, probably working late on her own projects. Tae-in-woo, what's got you calling at this hour? She asked, though her tone was friendly despite the late timing. I need your help with something. Can you access historical records about human territorial agreements? Specifically, anything about why their boundaries are treated so differently from everyone else's? Hyune's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. Why are you asking about human space? That's not exactly your area of expertise. I brought up a question about it at today's Border Commission meeting, and everyone acted like I'd just insulted their ancestors. I'm trying to understand what I walked into. There was a long pause before Hyune responded. Jin Woo could see her weighing her words carefully. Look, I can tell you what's in the public records, but honestly, there's not much there. Every major power has the same basic agreement with humanity. No entry without invitation, complete territorial recognition, no challenges to their claimed space. It's been that way for decades, But why? Jinwoo pressed. What makes them so special? They're still a relatively young civilization compared to most of the galaxy. Hyun-ai glanced around her office as if checking to make sure no one else was listening. Can you access a secure channel from your ship? Jinwoo quickly activated his diplomatic encryption protocols, creating a protected communication link between their vessels. We're secure now. What's going on? I've seen some of the older military analysis reports, Hyun-ai said quietly. Not the public summaries, but the detailed assessments that get filed away and forgotten. The consensus among our strategic planners is that humanity represents what they call an unknown variable in galactic politics. What does that mean exactly? It means nobody really knows what humans are capable of, and everyone's too nervous to find out. Hyun-ai pulled up something on her own terminal, though she didn't share the display. The few times anyone has had direct military encounters with human forces, the results were unusual. Jinwoo felt a chill run down his spine. Encounters? What kind of encounters? About 40 years ago, the Korthax Empire decided to test human defenses. You know the Korthax, right? They've conquered half the Outer Rim, never lost a major battle. Consider themselves the galaxy's premier military force. What happened? Hyun-ai was quiet for a long moment. The war lasted 6 months. It ended with the complete destruction of a Korthax fleet and human ships appearing in orbit around the Korthax homeworld. No one talks about it anymore, but the after-action reports are still in our databases if you know where to look. The humans won against the Korthax Empire. That's the thing, Jinwoo. According to the reports, the humans didn't just win. They demonstrated capabilities that our military analysts still can't fully explain. Technology that seemed decades ahead of what they should have possessed. Tactical coordination that suggested much larger fleet numbers than anyone had estimated. Jinwoo stared at his terminal screen, trying to process what he was hearing. Are you saying the humans have been hiding their true military strength? I'm saying that every species in the galaxy has apparently decided that finding out the truth isn't worth the risk. Hyun-ai's expression was serious now. My advice? Drop this investigation. Some questions are better left unasked, especially when the answers might be more than we can handle. The communication link went dark, leaving Jinwoo alone with his thoughts and a growing sense that he'd stumbled onto something much bigger than a simple territorial dispute. Ambassador Tai Rim sat alone in her private study, surrounded by the soft glow of holographic displays she hadn't accessed in 40 years. The conversation with the young Veltar representative had stirred up memories she'd worked hard to bury. Her hands trembled slightly as she entered her personal access codes, knowing that what she was about to review would bring back nightmares. She'd finally managed to escape. The files materialized in the air around her, classified documents from the sector war that most of the galaxy had collectively decided to forget. As the data streams loaded, she poured herself a glass of hegemony wine, knowing she'd need something to steady her nerves for what was coming. 40 years ago, Ambassador Tai Rim had been a junior diplomatic aide, eager and ambitious, assigned to monitor the expanding human colonies for potential territorial conflicts. Humanity had been in space for barely 50 years at that point, establishing settlements on a dozen worlds along the inner rim. They seemed harmless enough, focused primarily on agriculture and basic manufacturing. Their technology appeared roughly equivalent to what most species achieved within their first century of spacefaring. The Korthax Empire had been watching too, but with very different intentions. The Korthax were the galaxy's acknowledged apex, predators. Over 3 centuries, they had built an empire spanning 40 conquered worlds through sheer military superiority. Their philosophy was simple: strength determined survival, and weakness invited destruction. When they observed humanity's rapid expansion into strategically valuable systems, they saw an opportunity to claim those resources while eliminating a potential future rival. Tai Rim remembered the intelligence briefings leading up to the conflict. Korthax military analysts had studied human defensive capabilities and found them wanting. 12 lightly defended colonies, minimal orbital defenses, and small patrol fleets using what appeared to be standard commercial-grade weaponry. The Korthax, High Command classified humanity as a negligible threat and approved a military operation designed to be swift and decisive. The holographic displays around Tyrim shifted, showing tactical maps from the war's opening phase. 300 Korthax warships, representing nearly a quarter of their total fleet strength, had assembled at the edge of human space. This wasn't just a raid or a punitive expedition. This was a full-scale invasion designed to completely eliminate human presence in the sector. The attack began at 0800 Galactic Standard Time on what would later be remembered as Black Tuesday. The target was New Sol, a human agricultural colony with a population of roughly 2 million. It was chosen specifically because it was humanity's newest settlement, presumably their most vulnerable. Initial reports suggested the battle would be over within hours. Korthax forces overwhelmed the orbital defense platforms and began their descent toward the planet's surface. Human resistance appeared minimal, consisting mainly of hastily assembled militia units with basic weapons. Then, something changed. Tyrim pulled up the communication logs from that day, her stomach tightening as she read through the increasingly frantic Korthax transmissions. What had started as routine tactical reports quickly became confused distress calls. Ground forces report unusual resistance patterns. Enemy appears to have advanced knowledge of our assault vectors. Fleet Command, our orbital bombardment systems are experiencing simultaneous failures across multiple vessels. The reports grew more desperate as the hours passed. Korthax forces found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move, countering strategies that should have been impossible for a primitive species to understand. Human. Resistance wasn't just effective, it was surgical in its precision. By the end of the first day, the Korthax invasion force had lost over 60 ships and thousands of ground troops. But the truly disturbing part wasn't the losses themselves, it was how those losses occurred. Human weapons didn't just destroy Korthax vessels, they disabled them with impossible accuracy, targeting specific systems while leaving life support functional just long enough for crews to transmit their final moments back to Fleet Command. The psychological impact was devastating. Korthax warriors, who had never known defeat, found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to toy with them before delivering the killing blow. The war dragged on for 6 months, but the outcome was never really in doubt after that first day. Every Korthax offensive was met with increasingly sophisticated human responses. Supply lines were severed with impossible precision. Command structures were eliminated through targeted strikes that showed intimate knowledge of Korthax military organization. Most disturbing of all, human forces began appearing in locations where they shouldn't have been able to reach, as if they possessed transportation technology far beyond what their public capabilities suggested. Tyrim paused the IDAS playback and took a long sip of wine, remembering the fear that had gripped the galactic diplomatic community during those months. If humanity could systematically dismantle the Korthax Empire's military might, what did that mean for everyone else? The end came suddenly and without warning. On a Tuesday morning, human vessels appeared in orbit around Kortha Prime, the Korthax homeworld, not invasion fleets or massive battle groups, but small formations of ships that had somehow bypassed 3 layers of the galaxy's most sophisticated defensive systems. They didn't attack. They didn't issue demands. They simply waited. For 3 days, human ships maintained orbit around the Korthax capital, while the entire empire held its breath. No communication was attempted, no threats were made. The ships just hung there in space like a silent promise of what could happen if they chose to act. On the 4th day, they left as mysteriously as they had arrived. Within hours, the Korthax Empire formally surrendered and sued for peace. Tyrim closed the files and sat back in her chair, feeling the weight of those memories settling on her shoulders once again. She remembered the peace negotiations that followed, how the Korthax ambassador had looked like a broken man, his warrior's pride completely shattered by whatever he had witnessed during those 3 days. That was when the galaxy's powers had quietly agreed to establish the territorial restrictions around human space. Not because humanity had demanded it, but because everyone suddenly understood that some sleeping giants were better left undisturbed. Jinwoo couldn't shake the feeling that someone wanted him to find the truth. Over the past week, classified documents had been appearing in his personal database, files that should have been far beyond his security clearance. Each morning brought new reports, technical analyses, and military assessments that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of what had really happened during the sector war. The latest batch of files contained detailed examinations of Korthak's shipwreckage recovered after the conflict. Jin Woo sat in his quarters, studying holographic reconstructions of destroyed vessels while trying to understand what he was seeing. The damage patterns made no sense according to conventional weapons technology. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority message. Jin Woo accepted the communication, and Sujin's face appeared on his screen. She was a contact he'd developed in galactic intelligence, someone who usually dealt in routine information exchanges between species, but her expression now was anything but routine. "We need to meet in person," she said without preamble. "Docking. Bay 7 on Station Kepler. Come alone and don't tell anyone where you're going." The connection ended before Jin Woo could respond, leaving him staring at a blank screen. Sojin had never requested a face-to-face meeting before, and the tension in her voice suggested this was about much more than routine intelligence sharing. 2 hours later, Jin Woo found himself walking through the dimly lit corridors of an older section of Station Kepler. Docking Bay 7 was in the industrial district, a place where freight haulers and cargo vessels conducted their business away from the more prestigious diplomatic areas. Sujin was waiting for him near a stack of shipping containers, her usual professional demeanor replaced by obvious nervousness. "You need to stop your investigation," she said as soon as he approached. "Whatever you think you're looking for, trust me, you don't want to find it." "People keep telling me that." "But no. One will explain why," Jin Woo replied. "I'm a diplomatic representative trying to understand galactic territorial law. Why is everyone so afraid of a simple question about human space?" Sujin glanced around the empty docking bay, then pulled out a small data chip. Her hands were visibly shaking as she held it out to him. "Because some answers are too dangerous to know," she whispered. "This contains technical analysis reports from the sector war aftermath. Military experts from 6 different species tried to understand what happened to the Korthak's fleet. What they found kept most of them awake at night for years." Jin Woo took the chip, feeling its weight seemed somehow heavier than it should. "What kind of analysis? The kind that proves everything we thought we knew about human capabilities was wrong." Sujin's voice was barely audible now. "The Korthaks weren't just defeated, Jin Woo. They were completely outclassed by technology that shouldn't exist." She activated a small holographic projector, showing him images of destroyed Korthaks warships. The vessels looked like they had been precisely dissected, rather than destroyed in battle. "Look at the damage patterns," Sujin continued. "Human weapons didn't just punch holes through Korthak's armor. They simultaneously disabled every major system on each ship while keeping life support operational just long enough for the crews to send distress signals. That level of precision requires computational power and targeting systems decades beyond what humanity should possess." Jin Woo studied the wreckage images, noting how each destroyed vessel showed identical damage signatures. "Maybe they got lucky, or developed some new weapon technology." "That's what we all wanted to believe," Sujin said grimly, until the astronomical surveys came in. The holographic display shifted, showing star charts from the war period. 3 red markers indicated locations where Korthak's naval bases had been positioned. "The humans didn't just destroy these bases," Sujin explained. "They made the entire star systems uninhabitable, not through conventional weapons or even nuclear bombardment. They somehow destabilized the stars themselves, causing solar flares and radiation bursts that sterilized everything within several light years." Jin Woo felt his blood growing cold. "That's impossible. Stellar manipulation requires energy outputs equivalent to entire civilizations." "Exactly." Sujin's expression was haunted, and they did it simultaneously across 3 different systems, separated by hundreds of light years. The coordination alone suggests capabilities that our best scientists say shouldn't be possible. The implications were staggering. Jin Woo tried to process what he was hearing, but it challenged everything he thought he understood about galactic power structures. "Request immediate reinforcement. Human defensive capabilities significantly exceed intelligence estimates." "There's more," Sujin continued reluctantly. "After the war ended, Long-range surveys detected massive energy signatures deep within human space. Not from their known colonies, but from regions we'd never mapped before. Construction projects on scales that dwarf anything ever built by any known civilization. She showed him sensor readings that looked more like natural phenomena than artificial constructs, energy outputs that registered as significant fractions of stellar luminosity, organized in geometric patterns that suggested intentional design. The working theory among our analysts is that humanity's 12 visible colonies aren't their civilization, Sujin said quietly. They're just the outermost settlements of something much larger, something that's been deliberately keeping itself hidden. Jinwoo sank down onto a nearby crate, overwhelmed by the scale of what she was describing. If this is true, why hide it? Why pretend to be a small developing species? Because revealing the truth would change everything, Sujin replied. Right now the galaxy functions because there's a balance of power. Multiple species, multiple empires, all roughly comparable in their capabilities. But if one civilization possessed technology this advanced, that balance would collapse overnight. She deactivated the holographic display and stepped closer to Jinwoo. Every species in the galaxy has apparently reached the same conclusion independently. It's better to pretend we don't know what humanity really is than to face the reality that we're all completely defenseless against them. Jinwoo looked down at the data chip in his hands, understanding now why everyone had tried to discourage his investigation. What am I supposed to do with this information? Sujin's smile was sad and tired. The same thing every other species has done for the past 40 years. Pretend you never learned it, and pray that humanity continues to find it convenient to let the rest of us believe we matter. The data chip felt like it was burning a hole in Jinwoo's pocket as he made his way through the crowded corridors of Station Kepler. Sujin's words echoed in his mind, but something inside him refused to let the matter rest. He was a diplomat, trained to seek truth and understanding. Walking away now would mean accepting that some realities were too dangerous to acknowledge. That's when he remembered reading about Admiral Kangde in one of the classified files. The sole surviving Korthax commander from the Sector War, living in exile on a remote moon called Haven's Rest. If anyone could provide first-hand answers about what really happened 40 years ago, it would be him. The journey to Haven's Rest took 3 days aboard a civilian transport. The moon orbited a gas giant at the edge of Korthax space, a place where exiled warriors went to live out their remaining years in isolation. Jinwoo had sent a message ahead, requesting an audience with the former admiral. To his surprise, Kang Dai had agreed to meet. Haven's Rest was a barren world, its surface dotted with simple dwellings where retired Korthax military officers lived in voluntary exile. The atmosphere was thin but breathable, and the landscape was nothing but rolling hills of grey rock under a pale sky. Jinwoo found the address he'd been given and approached a modest dwelling built into the side of a hill. Admiral Kangde answered the door himself. He was ancient by Korthax standards, his once powerful warrior's frame now bent with age. His eyes, though, remained sharp and alert. Without a word, he gestured for Jinwoo to enter. The interior was sparse but comfortable, decorated with a few military commendations from Kangde's early career. They sat across from each other in worn chairs, and Jinwoo activated a recording device. "You want to know about the humans," Kangde said before Jinwoo could speak. His voice was a gravelly whisper, but it carried the weight of terrible knowledge. Everyone does eventually, but no one wants to believe the truth when they hear it. "I've seen the technical reports," Jinwoo began, "the damage analysis, the energy readings. I know the official story doesn't add up." Kangde laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Official story. We told ourselves so many lies after that war, had to really. The alternative was admitting that everything we thought we knew about galactic civilization was wrong." The old admiral stood and walked to a window overlooking the barren landscape. "I was fleet commander of the 3rd Assault Group. 300 ships under my command. The finest warriors in Korthax history. We'd conquered 40 worlds, never lost a major engagement. When High Command ordered us to eliminate the human colonies, I thought it would be over in days." "What changed your mind?" "The first day of fighting." Kangde's voice grew distant. "We hit their colony at New Seoul with everything we had. Orbital bombardment, ground assault, the full military doctrine that had worked on dozens of other worlds. But the humans, they were ready for us. Not just prepared, but ready in ways that should have been impossible. Jinwoo leaned forward. Ready how? They knew our battle plans before we implemented them, countered strategies we'd never used before. Their defensive positions were exactly where they needed to be, to maximize our casualties while minimizing their own. Kangdae turned back to face Jinwoo. It was like fighting an enemy that could see the future. The Admiral returned to his chair, his movements slow and deliberate. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was their weapons. They didn't just destroy our ships, Representative Jinwoo. They performed surgery on them. Surgery? Every vessel we lost was disabled in exactly the same pattern. Life support kept functional, while everything else was systematically destroyed. Communication stayed online just long enough for crews to transmit their final moments. It was psychological warfare on a level we'd never encountered. Jinwoo felt a chill run down his spine. The reports mentioned stellar manipulation. What did you see? Kangdae was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. 3 of our naval bases, each in a different star system. We watched the stars themselves become weapons. Solar flares, directed with precision that turned entire regions of space into death zones. The energy coordination required. He shook his head. Our best scientists said it was impossible. How did the war end? With the humiliation of my people. Kangdae's voice turned bitter. Human ships appeared in orbit around our homeworld, not invasion fleets, just small formations that had somehow bypassed every defense we possessed. They didn't attack, didn't issue demands, they just waited. The old admiral stood again, this time moving to a shelf where he retrieved a small data tablet. For 3 days, those ships hung in our sky like a promise of extinction. Do you know what we discovered during those 3 days, Representative? Jinwoo shook his head. We scanned human space, deep scans using every sensor array we possessed. Kangdae's voice dropped to barely a whisper. What we thought was their entire civilization, those 12 colony worlds, they were just the suburbs, the outer edge of something vast beyond comprehension. The tablet came to life, showing sensor readings that made Jinwoo's mind reel. Energy signatures indicating thousands of star systems, construction projects the size of solar systems, fleet, concentrations that dwarfed the combined military might of every known galactic power. Tens of thousands of systems, Representative. Artificial constructs that our engineers couldn't even categorize. Technology that made everything we'd accomplished look like children playing with toys. Kangdae set the tablet down with shaking hands. We realized we hadn't been fighting a young spacefaring species. We'd been fighting something ancient and incomprehensibly advanced that was pretending to be primitive. Jinwoo stared at the readings, trying to process their implications. Why would they hide this? Because the day humanity stops pretending. To be weak is the day every other species in the galaxy becomes irrelevant, Kangdae replied. They're not hiding from us, Representative. They're protecting us from the truth of our own insignificance. The Admiral walked Jinwoo to the door as their meeting concluded. Every species instinctively understands this on some level. That's why no one challenges human borders. That's why their territory remains inviolate. We all know, deep down, that we're living at the mercy of something that could end us without effort. As Jinwoo prepared to leave, Kangdae placed a weathered hand on his shoulder. You came here seeking truth, and I've given it to you. Now you have the same choice every other species has made. Accept the comfortable lie that keeps the galaxy stable, or face the reality that humanity is the apex predator pretending to be prey. During the long journey back to his ship, Jinwoo made his decision. He quietly filed his report as inconclusive and personally ensured that future Veltar territorial agreements would include the same clause that protected human space. Boundaries exist not to keep others out, but to keep something far more dangerous contained. And sometimes the greatest mercy is allowing sleeping giants to continue their slumber.